Have you ever felt trapped by your own past? That despite your best efforts, the weight of old mistakes clings like chains you can't shake off? Rahab's story cuts through that hopelessness like light in a cave. Her tale isn't simply about a woman with a reputation living in a doomed city. It's about redemption rewriting a destiny, about divine grace piercing through societal shame, and about the kind of faith that moves God's hand. Rahab's life began in the shadows, but her faith brought her into the spotlight of God's plan. Picture this: a woman's society condemned as unworthy, yet God appointed her to a role so significant it echoes into the birth of Christ. How could such a transformation happen? What unfolded that changed the narrative so radically? Can someone truly outrun the echo of failure and step into purpose? As Jericho's mighty walls collapsed, heaven didn't dwell on Rahab's past. Heaven beheld her heart. In that defining moment, she wasn't just a woman with a scandalous title. She was the thread in the divine tapestry of God's unfolding promise. How did she arrive there? What message lies buried in her legacy for us today? Keep reading, because what follows may completely reframe your understanding of mercy, identity, and the power of courageous belief. And if you're someone who dares to believe that no soul is too far gone, drop a 777 in the comments. Let's walk together into the heart of Rahab's extraordinary story. Joshua, the man who had once stood beside Moses as a faithful aide, now bore the mantle of leadership for the people of Israel. His heart carried the weight of both history and hope. He could not forget what had happened 40 years earlier, under the harsh sun of the wilderness, when Moses had appointed 12 men to scout the land of Canaan. Though they saw the richness of the land, most of the spies were overwhelmed by fear. 10 of them returned, trembling, terrified by the giants they had seen, and their fear infected the entire nation. Only Joshua and Caleb stood firm. Caleb boldly declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it," as recorded in Numbers 13:30. But the others sowed fear, insisting, "We can't attack those people, they are stronger than we are," Numbers 13:31. Their dread did more than paralyze. It robbed a generation of promise and cast Israel into a wilderness of wandering. Imagine standing at the edge of your destiny and watching it evaporate because someone else couldn't see what God had declared. How often do we surrender our calling to the doubts of others? Now, Israel once again stood on the threshold of Canaan. The air was thick with expectancy, the land's harvests wafting across the Jordan like an invitation. But this time, Joshua acted differently. No more sending 12 voices into the unknown. He dispatched only 2 spies, silent, strategic, and concealed under the cover of night. Jericho loomed ahead of them, a city wrapped in towering walls and brimming with defenses. This was no fragile village. Its outer and inner walls were so thick that homes were carved directly into them. Guards patrolled the tops, eyes sharpened to detect any threat. Breaching Jericho would not be simple. Without knowing the city's inner layout or weaknesses, success seemed unreachable. Yet under the hush of night, those 2 spies slipped unnoticed through the city's gates, blending among travelers, merchants, and wanderers. Where could they hide in a city like this? Always alert, always watching for intruders. Their journey led them, perhaps divinely, to a house built into the very wall, Rahab's house. She was known to many by her profession, a prostitute, a woman whispered about, but rarely honored. Doesn't it seem almost scandalous that God's plan would wind through such a place? Yet what if the person society deems least worthy is exactly the person God chooses to be the key? The book of Joshua recounts this moment plainly. Then Joshua's son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Joshua 2. Behind that unassuming door, destiny was quietly stirring. What happens when God plants purpose in a place everyone else overlooks? Perhaps even now, stories of redemption are being written in homes the world forgets. Inside Rahab's dimly lit home, the two spies took shelter, unaware that their fate and the fate of Israel's conquest balanced on the choices of a woman. Society called dishonorable. No one would expect Israelite agents to seek safety in such a place. Her house, while familiar to many men, was cloaked in shame. Could it possibly become the hiding place for God's secret mission? Rahab, however, was no ordinary woman. Though her neighbors scorned her, she was observant, intelligent, and attentive to the currents of rumor that swept through her city. She had heard the stories, how the Israelites walked through the Red Sea on dry ground, how mighty kings east of the Jordan had fallen under the weight of their advance. These weren't mere fables to her. What stirred in her soul as she heard about Israel's God? Was it simply fear, or was it something bolder? Could this God, so unlike the silent idols of Jericho, offer hope even to someone like her? And what if hope didn't come dressed in prestige, but in faith daring to believe in whispers? Unbeknownst to the spies, news of their arrival reached the king swiftly. Word spread fast in Jericho, especially when the stakes were high. Suspicion ignited like wildfire. The king wasted no time. He ordered soldiers to Rahab's home, demanding the spies be turned over immediately. Can you imagine the sudden dread that must have fallen on that household? Heavy fists pounded on the door. Not the hushed knock of another visitor seeking secrecy, but the thundering demand of royal authority. "Bring out the men who came to you," the guards commanded. "They have come to spy out the whole land." Joshua 2:3. In that tense moment, Rahab stood between the wrath of her king and the safety of strangers. Her loyalty, her life, and the lives of those hidden in her roof all hung in the balance. What Rahab did next would alter the trajectory of not just her own life, but that of a nation. Without hesitation, she led the spies to the roof of her home. There, among heaps of drying flax, she concealed them under stalks that smelled of harvest. Her heart pounded as she descended. The soldiers stormed in, their torches casting wild shadows across the walls. Calmly, Rahab greeted them with a carefully crafted deception. "Yes," she said, "the men came to me, but I didn't know where they were from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. If you hurry, maybe you'll catch them." Joshua 2:4-5. What compelled her to speak those words? Was it courage, desperation, or a holy mixture of both? The soldiers believed her. They bolted from the house, chasing shadows down Jericho's streets, leaving Rahab once again in silence, except now that silence was electric with purpose. What kind of woman risks everything for two strangers from an enemy people? Why would she defy her king, her city, and everything familiar to protect foreigners with no promise of return? The answer, buried in her heart, was not merely fear. It was faith, quiet, growing, undeniable faith. Stories of the God of Israel had seeped through the cracks of her life. While others laughed or dismissed them, Rahab listened. She weighed them in the lonely hours. Could this God see her? Had he noticed her pain, her longing to be known beyond her shame? As the sounds of the guards faded, she climbed once more to the roof. There, she looked the spies in the eyes and spoke with the conviction of someone who had decided, truly decided, whom she would serve. "I know that the Lord has given you this land," she said. "A great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear." Joshua 2:9. These weren't hollow words. This was a woman proclaiming allegiance to a God she'd never seen, but had come to trust more than the idols of her people. She recounted how the people of Jericho had heard about the Red Sea crossing, how they'd trembled when news of Sihon and Og's defeat reached their gates. Her voice didn't shake. Her declaration pierced the roof like prophecy. "The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Joshua. Isilian. Rahab didn't stop at confession. She pleaded for covenant. "Swear to me by the Lord," she begged, "that because I have shown kindness to you, you will show kindness to my family." She didn't just ask for her own life, but for the lives of her parents, her siblings, and all they owned. Joshua 2:12-13. Can you imagine that moment? A woman who had only known transactions of shame now stood before God's people, asking for mercy, not in coins, but in kindness. Her voice, once used to bargain, with men, now spoke with sacred purpose, and the spies heard her. They looked at her not as a harlot, but as a woman of valor. "Our lives for your lives," they said solemnly. "If you don't betray us, when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you." Joshua 2:14. With that pledge, a holy bond was sealed, not just between Rahab and the spies, but between her and the God she had dared to believe in. No longer was she merely a woman of Jericho. She was now a woman of promise. But the danger was not yet behind them. Jericho's gates remained shut, its watchmen ever alert. The city teemed with suspicion, and Rahab knew the longer the spies stayed, the greater the risk. She rummaged through her belongings and found a scarlet cord, a length of rope, red as fresh blood, vibrant and undeniable. She tied it to something sturdy in her window and lowered it down the outer wall. This rope, simple and unassuming, would become a symbol of deliverance. With careful urgency, the spies climbed down, their bodies pressed against the cold stone, shadows swallowing their forms one by one. Before they left, the spies reaffirmed the conditions of their covenant. "This oath is valid only if you tie this scarlet cord in the window," one said, "and if your entire family remains inside this house. If anyone steps outside, their blood is on their own heads." Joshua 2:17-19. They warned her too. If she betrayed their mission, the covenant would be void. Rahab nodded, her resolve unshaken. "Agreed," she said. "Let it be as you say." Joshua 2:21. With those words, she cast her lot with the God of Israel, not by law, not by heritage, but by faith. As the spies disappeared into the night, Rahab stood alone, the cord swaying in the cool breeze. It fluttered like a banner of defiance and hope. She had chosen her side, and that choice would rewrite history. The spies didn't return directly to Joshua. They hid for 3 days in the hills, likely praying, breathing, shallowly beneath rocky outcroppings until the search parties gave up. When they returned, their report was bold. "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Joshua 2:24. But what they didn't say, what couldn't be measured, was the faith they had witnessed in a woman the world had written off. Back inside Jericho, Rahab's world had become incredibly small. Just one house, one window, one scarlet cord. Every morning she checked that rope, her fingers tracing its threads. It was no longer just a rope. It was her covenant, her banner, her hope. Around her, life continued in Jericho. Children played in the streets. Merchants sold goods in the square. Soldiers trained and drank and scoffed at the rumors of Israel's God. But Rahab saw what others could not. She could feel it in the air, the tension, the stillness before a storm. While her city trusted in walls of stone, Rahab placed her trust in a promise whispered on the roof of her home. Far from Jericho, the people of Israel were on the move. Joshua rose early and led the nation to the Jordan. Over 1 million people, men, women, children, livestock, all journeyed toward the river's edge. They camped there, their tents dotting the land like a sea of waiting. This wasn't a stealth operation. It was a declaration. Israel was here, and they were coming with God's promise in their hearts. For 3 days they remained there, eyes fixed on the surging river, hearts remembering. The stories of seas parting and enemies falling. Joshua's voice rose like a trumpet. "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Joshua 3:5. The morning came, and with it a sacred hush. Joshua ordered the priests to take up the Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest that held the stone tablets inscribed by God himself, and step ahead of the people. Before them roared the Jordan River, swollen from spring rains, its waves devouring everything in their path. No, Ordinary army would cross such a torrent. But this was no ordinary people, and this was no ordinary campaign. As the feet of the priests touched the edge of the water, something beyond explanation occurred. The river stopped. It stood still, defying nature, as if the breath of heaven had pushed the waters back. Scripture says, "The water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap," Joshua 3:16. And where once a flood raged, dry ground appeared. The people began to walk across. Children clung to parents. Elderly men leaned on staffs. Warriors marched with wide eyes, their sandals pressing into the soil that had moments before been swallowed by the current. It was a miracle unfolding in real time, a mirror of what their ancestors had witnessed at the Red Sea. But this generation didn't just hear about God's power, they experienced it. As they crossed to the far side, God spoke to Joshua again. He instructed one man from each tribe to take a stone from the riverbed, 12 stones in all. These stones were to become a memorial, a monument built not from imagination, but from the very place God had touched, a visual testimony for their children and grandchildren, that they might ask, "What do these stones mean?" and hear the answer, "This is where the Lord held back the waters for his people." Joshua 4:21-22. Meanwhile, Rahab remained within the walls of Jericho, her eyes fixed on that scarlet cord. She didn't know the precise day the Israelites would arrive, but she knew they were coming. Perhaps she climbed to the roof often, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. Each night, she may have whispered silent prayers for her family, begging them to trust her, pleading with them not to step outside when the time came. Around her, life seemed unchanged. The markets bustled, guards laughed, children played. But underneath the normalcy, dread surely coiled like smoke. Could the people not sense the spiritual tremor that shook just beneath their feet? And then it happened. On the 10th day of the first month, Israel broke camp and marched toward Jericho. They arrived at a place called Gilgal, and there, in the dust of anticipation, Joshua had the 12 stones set up as a circle of witness, a rugged altar that said, "God was here." The Israelites gathered, listening to Joshua recount the miracle at the Jordan. Fathers stood beside sons, pointing to the stones as their leader said, "This is where God made a river stand still." Joshua 4:22. Imagine standing among them, how your heart would swell, knowing you walked with a God who parts waters, who writes stories of deliverance in stone. Across the plain, Jericho trembled. The people had heard the legends. Now they saw the fulfillment. An entire nation, men, women, children, animals, encamped outside their fortress, not hidden, not afraid. Their presence was a declaration that God's promise had arrived. What could Jericho do but prepare for battle? They had walls. They had weapons. But did they have any hope against a God who split seas and stilled rivers? Surely the warriors expected Israel to begin siege preparations, build ladders, drag battering rams, prepare to scale the walls. But none of that came. Instead, God gave Joshua a battle plan that defied human logic. He instructed the people to march around the city once a day for 6 days. Priests were to carry trumpets made of ram's horns, walking ahead of the ark. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, then blow the trumpets and shout. Then the walls would fall. Joshua 6:3-5. No general would propose such a strategy. Only divine authority could conceive it, and only those who trusted God without seeing would obey. And so the procession began. On the first morning, the people of Jericho looked out and saw something bizarre. Ranks of soldiers marching silently, priests walking with the ark, horns glinting in the sun, no words spoken. One full circle, then back to camp. The next day, the same, then again and again. By day 3, perhaps some mocked, but others surely began to feel unease. What kind of army marches in silence but with purpose? What power gives such eerie confidence? Each night, Rahab must have drawn her family closer. Stay inside. she likely warned. "Do not leave this house for any reason. This rope is our covenant." Outside, Jericho's bravado may have faltered, but Rahab's faith solidified. She was not watching soldiers. She was watching prophecy. With every loop around the city, her heart may have whispered, "He's coming. The God I trusted is coming." And then came the seventh day. The air was charged. As the sun rose, Israel appeared again, but this time they did not stop after one lap. They marched again and again, twice, 3 times. By the fourth, tension pulsed in the city. 5, 6, still, they marched, and then, the seventh time. The priests lifted their trumpets and blew a blast that echoed over stone and soil. Joshua raised his voice, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." Joshua 6:16. The people roared in unison. It was not the cry of men. It was the voice of heaven carried through human throats. Then it happened. The walls, so thick, so tall, trembled. Stone split. Dust filled the air. The mighty fortress crumbled like sand under a storm. Screams rang out. Chaos erupted, and Israel surged forward. The city that once laughed at whispers of miracles now fell under the hand of divine judgment. No sword or siege had brought the walls down. Faith had. But amid the destruction, mercy remembered a promise. Joshua turned to the 2 men who had once crept through Jericho's gates and hidden beneath Rahab's flax. "Go," he commanded, "into the house of the woman you swore to protect. Bring her and all who belong to her out, just as you promised." Joshua 6:22. And so the 2 spies rushed into the smoldering streets of Jericho, passing toppled walls and terrified cries, heading for one place. The house with the scarlet cord. Amid ruin, there it stood. Not a stone out of place. Not a timber broken. The cord still fluttered like a flame, waving with the power of an oath kept and a life spared. Inside, Rahab waited. Her family pressed close to her, perhaps clutching her hands, perhaps whispering prayers they didn't fully understand. They had trusted her, chosen her word over every other voice in Jericho. And now, salvation had come. The spies entered swiftly and led them out. Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers and sisters, every soul she had gathered under her roof. They walked together out of the shadow of judgment and into the care of a people they had once called enemies. While Jericho was burned and its treasures devoted to the Lord, Rahab and her family were spared. They were not just saved. They were given a place outside Israel's camp. It was a gesture of both mercy and transition. She had come out of one world, but was not yet fully part of another. And yet, the scriptures say something remarkable. But Rahab the prostitute and her family live among the Israelites to this day. Joshua 6:25. This wasn't temporary. It was transformation. She wasn't just rescued. She was received. Think of that. A woman known only for shame became a name etched into the story of God's people. Not merely tolerated, but embraced. Not merely forgiven, but woven in. The God who parted waters and brought down walls had also written Rahab's name into the narrative of redemption. But what would it mean for her to live among Israel? This was a people who had laws, holy, pure, and specific. A people who had heard from God on a mountain of fire. How could Rahab, a Canaanite, a former harlot, ever belong? Surely whispers followed her. Surely some women turned their eyes away when she passed. Some men may have remembered stories of her house, of her past. But Rahab had not simply adopted Israel's customs. She had adopted their God. Her faith had marked her long before she ever stepped outside those city walls. And faith, Scripture tells us, is what truly justifies. In the law, God had already made provision for the outsider. The community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreigner residing among you. The same laws and regulations will apply both to you and to the foreigner. Numbers 15:15-16. Long before Rahab ever saw a scarlet cord, God had prepared a place for her. Isn't it astonishing? She may not have known those words were written for her, but heaven knew. She didn't have to earn her place through pedigree or perfection. She simply had to believe. And she did. Her faith didn't roar. It whispered. It didn't come from knowledge of the Torah, but from reverence for the one who parted seas and silenced kings. Her life began to change. No longer was she bound to the rhythms of Jericho's shame. She now learned new rhythms, new songs, new prayers, new hope. And in time, something even more beautiful unfolded. Among the tribe of Judah, there lived a man named Salmon. Perhaps he had seen her from a distance, or perhaps he had heard her story from the spies themselves. But somehow, he saw her. Not the rumors, not the past, not the title. He saw the woman who had dared to trust when no one else in her city would. The woman who had risked her life to protect God's messengers. The woman who clung to a scarlet thread and believed in the God of Israel before ever seeing a single miracle with her own eyes. What did Rahab think the first time Salmon spoke to her with kindness? Did her heart race with fear? Did she expect rejection? Or did she already sense that the same God who saved her from Jericho was now writing something deeper into her days? The two were married, a former prostitute of Canaan and a noble son of Israel, a union the world never would have imagined. But heaven was not surprised. Heaven was orchestrating something far greater than appearances. From their union came a son. They named him Boaz, a man whose own life would reflect the legacy of kindness and inclusion he inherited from his mother. Boaz would grow to become a landowner in Bethlehem, a man of compassion and honor. And when he saw another foreign woman, Ruth, a Moabite widow gleaning in his fields, he too extended grace. He married her, and together they bore Obed. Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse became the father of King David. Yes, that King David, the shepherd boy who would slay giants, write psalms, and become the greatest king in Israel's history. David, the man after God's own heart. And in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, written in the Gospel of Matthew, there she is, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Matthew 1:5. Her name forever etched into the bloodline of the Savior. Can you feel the holy rhythm of that lineage? A woman once branded by her city's shame becomes a cornerstone in the story of salvation. The thread that tied Rahab to God's covenant didn't unravel when Jericho fell. It grew stronger, stretching across generations until it cradled the Messiah himself. Isn't it breathtaking how God delights in choosing the most unlikely people to fulfill his promises? Rahab's legacy was not limited to the survival of her family. Her true inheritance lived on in faith, in names, in nations. Imagine Rahab in the quiet of her later years. Perhaps she sat beneath a canopy of stars beside her husband, Salmon, watching their son Boaz play in the distance. Maybe she whispered prayers of gratitude, remembering the trembling nights in Jericho, the scarlet cord in the wind, the spies on her rooftop. Could she have ever imagined that her once broken story would be remembered for generations as a testimony of mercy and divine purpose? That her blood would one day run in the veins of kings and of the King of Kings? Rahab's journey was more than survival. It was adoption. It was transformation. It was the living proof that faith, even whispered in fear, moves the heart of God. Her house once opened to strangers for shameful reasons, but her heart opened to God, and that changed everything. What had once been a home of compromise became a sanctuary of covenant. Her faith wasn't loud, but it was real, and real faith, no matter how fragile, always catches heaven's attention. Scripture doesn't just mention her once. Rahab is remembered among the heroes of faith. In Hebrews 11, that sacred hall of spiritual giants, where names like Abraham, Moses, and Noah echo, there is Rahab. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Hebrews 11:31. She is named alongside patriarchs, prophets, and kings. And in the book of James, where faith is shown to be proven by works, Rahab is once again lifted as an example. Was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? James 2:25. Her faith was more than belief. It was action, obedience, and trust, wrapped in risk. But what does this story whisper to us across the centuries? It speaks to every person who thinks they've gone too far or fallen too deep. It says your past doesn't disqualify you, only your disbelief can. It reminds us that God doesn't call us when we've finally cleaned up. He calls us right in the middle of our mess, when the cords are still hanging and the walls are still shaking. He called Rahab not because of what she had done, but because of what she believed. She trusted when no one else did. She feared God more than man. And because of that, she became part of a greater redemption. Maybe today you feel like Rahab, marked by old labels, standing in a house that feels unworthy. Maybe you've made choices that echo with regret. But what if the scarlet cord of grace is already hanging outside your window? What if the whispers of God's presence in your life are calling you to trust Him with the pieces you can't fix? Rahab didn't need a perfect past. She needed a surrendered present, and so do we. Her story declares that God doesn't just forgive, He transforms. He doesn't just lift us out, He writes us in. Her name is not a footnote, it's a banner, a scarlet thread in the royal tapestry of God's story. So if you've ever felt like your faith is too small, your past too heavy, your shame too great, look to Rahab. Look at what God can do with a single act of bold trust. When everyone else saw a harlot, God saw a heroine. When the city saw disgrace, heaven saw destiny. And that same grace is extended to you, right now, wherever you are. Whether you feel surrounded by ruins or standing in the shadows, the hand of God is not shortened. His mercy still covers. His promises still stand. Even if your faith is a whisper behind shuttered windows, heaven hears it. The same God who honored Rahab's scarlet cord will honor your surrender. So if Rahab's story stirred something in you, stay with it. Let it sink deep. Share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe drop a 777 if you believe God still chooses the unlikely to reveal His glory. And if this message resonated, I invite you to subscribe, to like the video, and to share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know what scarlet thread your act of faith might start weaving in their life. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. May the same God who turned a house of shame into a beacon of salvation turn your life into a testimony of grace. May His favor rest upon you, and may His redemption reach every generation that comes after you. From Rahab's window to the cross, from a scarlet cord to crimson blood, the message remains. No one is too far gone. Not then, not now, not ever.